Good day, everyone. Welcome to the next Redfish School training session. I am John Mayfield from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and today we will go over the fabrics model in Redfish. This is the second session of a three-part series on the fabrics model. In this session, we will discuss fabric configuration and routing. In the next session, we will discuss example fabric models as the third session in the series. In today's session, we will go over the fabric configuration and routing, including the fabric model hierarchy, zones, address pools, and connections between resources. As we discussed in the previous session, the fabric model uses switches, ports, and adapters to model the physical topology. Within that topology, zones and address pools are used to control fabric routing in a fabric. These control constraints on how packets can flow across the fabric. Connections are used to control access rules for the fabric connected devices. Connections are managed at the endpoints. Zones, connections, and address pools model the customer intent in terms of connectivity. Zones describe isolation, and address pools describe constraints. Connections describe accessibility at the endpoints. These are defined by an administrator as to which endpoints can communicate with other endpoints. Fabric zones provide isolation of traffic to endpoints. Endpoints can only communicate with other endpoints within that zone. The default zone is where endpoints are placed when they are initially attached to the fabric. Administrators can provide connectivity between zones for scalability using zone of zones. Zone of zones can only contain zone of endpoints. Address pools provide constraints for components to exist on the fabric. They provide the control plane specific address pools and configuration. Some examples are subnets, default gateways, and VLANs. They can apply to specific zones or to the entire fabric via the default zone. Fabric connections provide access permissions at the endpoints when a communication channel is established. One can have connections between endpoints or endpoint groups for resources with similar connectivity requirements. While connections provide connectivity at the endpoints, they do not define routing between the endpoints. This is an example zone in Redfish. This describes a zone of endpoints versus a zone of zones, and routing between endpoints within this zone is enabled. There is a list of endpoints participating in this zone and a link to the address pool that describes the constraints for this zone. This is an example of an address pool in Redfish. This is an Ethernet address pool, so it has IPv4 addressing constraints. This describes the upper and lower bounds of the VLANs allowed, the address range for fabric links, and the boundaries for the system MAC. This is an example of a connection in Redfish. This connection type is memory and has memory chunk information. The initiator resources have read-write capabilities to the memory chunk at the target endpoint. There is only one initiator endpoint and one target endpoint that contains the memory being accessed. This brings us to the end of the fabric routing and configuration video. Thank you for watching today. For more information, you can visit the DMTF website at dmtf.org, or you can visit the Redfish Developer Hub at redfish.dmtf.org.